Hi all, welcome to my channel Satish Vlogs. In this video, I would be explaining the concept of a reserve. What is a reserve? What are the journal entries when the reserve has been created? How this reserve should get reported in financial statements? All those details I would be explaining in this video. With this introduction, let's move to the next slide of my PPT. In this slide, there is a diagram which depicts like a cycle. This is nothing but the accounting cycle. What is an accounting cycle? What are the various phases of an accounting cycle? All those details I had already provided in my previous video on accounting cycle. And also the concept of reserve closely matches up with the concept of a provision. What is a provision? And the details regarding the provision, all those details I had already provided in my previous video on provision. The links for these two videos I would be providing in the below box. Request the viewers to get into the details of those videos before going through the concept of a reserve. Okay, so and also as mentioned previously, I would be explaining my concepts considering the phases of an accounting cycle and also the examples wherever it is required. As part of the first phase of an accounting cycle, which is a business transaction, right? So my business transaction is reserve. Creating a reserve or reserve is my business transaction. What is a reserve? A reserve is nothing but the to set aside a certain sum of money from the organization's income statement, right? Yeah. So this reserve is primarily a charge to a P&L appropriation account. As everybody are aware, there are primarily two segments within the income statement. One is the P&L account and the other one is the P&L appropriation account. This reserve is a charge to a P&L appropriation account. It is not mandatory for the business entity when the business entity is unable to get the profits during a particular accounting period. Okay, which means there is no mandatory to create a reserve if business entity incurs the loss during any accounting period. Okay, and there will not be any tax benefit out of it because the reserve would be created after the gross profit or out of the return earnings which are being generated from the business, right? So there will not be any tax benefit out of it would get generated to the business entity. It is just a reclassification of the return earnings from the return earnings to the appropriate or respective reserves. There are various types of reserves like contingency reserve, general reserve, specific reserves, etc. What is the specific reserve? If any reserve is created for a specific purpose, then that reserve is required to be utilized only for that purpose. The usage is restricted to only that purpose, like dividend redemption reserve or debenture redemption reserve, equity redemption reserve. These reserves are supposed to be utilized only for the purpose for which the reserves are being created. The usage is completely restricted. It shouldn't be utilized for some other purpose. Okay. General reserve, this reserve can be utilized in a general way as per the requirement for the as per the needs of the organization. Similarly, contingency reserve. What is this contingency reserve all about? What is a contingency? Before getting into details of a contingency reserve, what is a contingency? A contingency is nothing but the an event which would happen or non-happen of that particular event would depend on the happening or non-happening of one or more uncertain future events, right? Which means let's take a business is into a windmill segment, which means producing electricity using the windmills. So because of the natural calamities like thunderstorms, if the windmills is partially got damaged, then a loss would get generated, right? Normally the business entity would provide the depreciation on the windmills, but on top of it, because of the natural calamities, if the windmill is partially got damaged, then in such a case it is a huge loss to that entity because of the damage, and if that loss gets charged, is supposed to get charged to the income statement, right? Then in for such accounting period, the profits of that entity would get hugely reduced or deflated, and in turn it would impact the financials of the business organization. To overcome such kind of instances, if the reserve has already been getting created in every accounting period, then in such a case we have been setting aside some amount of profits from the retained earnings in order to face such kind of instances which might arise in the future period, right? So with this, hope you are able to understand what is this reserve all about. Now let's move to the next phase of an accounting cycle, which is a journalizing phase. What is this phase all about? For whatever the business transaction for which the journal entries are supposed to be recorded, right? So as mentioned, this is just a moving of the amounts, movement or reclassification of the retained earnings from the retained earnings to the appropriate or respective reserves, right? So which means the profits normally would be, when the entity generates the profits, it would be, the balance would be the credit, right? Because as per the nominal that profits would be fall under nominal account, which means all incomes and gains or profits are supposed to be credited, and all expenses or losses are supposed to be debited. If profits gets arises, then the balance of the profit would be in the credit balance. So now I am supposed to move my return earnings to the respective reserve account, which means, and these reserves normally would get charged to a P&L appropriation account. So the P&L appropriation account is supposed to be debited, and the credit needs to be given to the respective reserve account. The reserve account could be general reserve or specific reserve or contingency reserve, etc. So with this, hope the journal entries are clear, right? Let's move to the third phase of an accounting cycle, which is a ledger creation or ledger posting phase. What is this phase all about? For whatever the journal entries which were recorded as part of journal entries, for those journal entries, the ledger accounts are supposed to be created and postings needs to be done accordingly. So the posting would be made to the P&L appropriation account and the respective reserves account after creating the ledger accounts, and the postings would be done accordingly, right? Okay, now let's move to the fourth phase of an accounting cycle, which is a trial balance phase. What is this phase all about? Trial balance is nothing but the summary of the balances of the ledger account. So whatever the balances which is getting reflected against the reserve account and the returnings account are supposed to be updated in the trial balance. The balances under the debit side of the trial balance should matches up with the balance which has been shown under credit side of the trial balance. There shouldn't be any discrepancy, because as we have been following double entry system of bookkeeping accounting, there shouldn't be any discrepancy between debits and credits. Now let's move to the last phase of an accounting cycle, which is a financial statement phase. What is this phase all about? What are the critical elements of a financial statement? One is the income statement and the other one is the balance sheet. As mentioned or stated in my previous phases, this reserve doesn't directly impact my P&L under the income P&L segment under the income statement. These reserves would directly hit my P&L appropriation account under the income statement. Okay, so my P&L appropriation would be charged as an expense against those respective reserves, and in the balance sheet the amounts which are getting reflected against the reserve accounts are supposed to be updated under the owner's equity in the balance sheet, which is reported under the liabilities side. Okay, and these balances we would be directly taking from the trial balance. Okay, hope this is clear. With this, I hope the viewers are able to understand what is this reserve all about, what are the primary differences between reserve versus the provision, how the reserve, what are the journal entries when the reserve has been created, and how this reserve should get reported in the financial statements. If the viewers like this video, request you to like it, share it to your friends, and subscribe my channel for more videos. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next video.